Welcome back to Navigating Abundance. Today, our guest is Fred Oaks, the principal consultant at Family Business Facilitators. Fred has been consulting since 2003 and specializes in multi-generational family businesses. In a past life, he was a senior pastor, which has helped inform his ability to maintain confidentiality and connect in meaningful ways. Today's episode will discuss the concept of sowing seeds and reaping legacy, which Fred has written on in the past.
Welcome to the Navigating Abundance podcast. Our goal is to encourage you to pursue your total family wealth potential through insightful conversation with experts and thought leaders in their fields. But first, some obligatory disclosures. Navigating Abundance podcasts do not represent investment, legal, or tax advice. Any opinion expressed in Navigating Abundance podcast is solely those of Christopher Tanke and his guests and are based upon information believed to be reliable but not guaranteed. Podcasts are produced for educational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered an endorsement of the guest or the views that they hold. Information shared may not be appropriate for your personal situation. Consult a qualified advisor for guidance. Investment advisory services are offered through Strategic Financial Group, LLC, a registered investment advisor. Navigating Abundance is a trademark of Strategic Financial Group, LLC. And now here's your host, Chris Tanke.
Welcome back to Navigating Abundance. I'm Chris Tanke, and today I'm joined by Fred Oaks of Family Business Facilitators. Fred is the founder of that organization and is the chief consultant. And I got to tell you, Fred, I am so glad that we have, through mutual acquaintance, tripped over each other. Navigating Abundance and FBF have a lot of synergy. And I appreciate your website. I appreciate your thought. And as you know, I've got kind of gushed over the blogs that you've created. Ladies and gentlemen, you've got to go to familybusinessfacilitators.com and take a look at these blogs and look at them every week. I appreciate the consistency of them, but I also appreciate just the way they're written. Really, really good, really encouraged me, and I just think it's great stuff. So folks, I read this, I said, we got to bring Fred on here, and we have to maybe even use one of these blogs, and we're going to do that. We're going to talk about his blog, Sowing Seeds, Reaping Legacy. Now, that sounds like Navigating Abundance, doesn't it? But before we begin with that, why don't you share with the audience a little bit about who you are and how you came to create Family Business Facilitators.
Thank you, Chris. It's a privilege to be on your podcast. I appreciate what you're doing, and I appreciate total family wealth, the emphasis you have on considering one's legacy while there's time to address it thoughtfully and well. And I want to be a part of that effort and support your good work.
Thank you.
I was a pastor for 23 years and then worked for a family foundation as a program officer for 17 years. Along the way, I developed some skills in facilitation. Every pastor, of course, is leading worship services. You're leading small group meetings, board meetings, church retreats. The Indianapolis Center for Congregation actually hired me to work in a consulting role to study congregational learning and change. So I developed some facilitation skills around organizational development at that time. Did that work while a full-time pastor for several years. And then the Kern family in Waukesha, Wisconsin, hired me away from pastoral ministry to be a program officer at their foundation, a job I had for 17 years until 2022. I'm comfortably retired. I'm so thankful for that every day and more grateful as I get older. I don't really need to work. But after 3 years of retirement, I wanted to give back, and I started to consider how best to do that. And Family Business Facilitators is my attempt to steward a lifetime of learning, to take the interpersonal, the presentation, the facilitation skills that I developed as a pastor, as an organizational development consultant working primarily with judicatories and congregations, and then to use my facilitation skills from grantee learning summits at the Kern Family Foundation. They would give to dozens of organizations and then convene them and help them learn from one another as they address the similar challenges. So the facilitation required to lead those events well, to make sure that everyone had a good experience and came away better equipped to lead the changes they were seeking to lead than when they got there. That's good work. That's work that I did and was proud of doing it. It was a great privilege to work for that family. So now I want to bring those skills to bear in support of business-owning families, primarily in the American Midwest. I do that because I'm convinced of the tremendous contribution that entrepreneurs and family businesses make to our society, our standard of living, and just how they shape people who work in and for those businesses.
Yeah, that's great. And of course, you're talking to one. I'm a Midwest family business, so I'm all ears. I'm interested in that DNA. And I've got to say, we have a similar past. I was in ministry as well and transferred into like a second half of my life working in a different space. But my goodness, the correlation between leading a congregation and the dynamics there and leading a business is it's pretty easy to connect the dots. So people are people, decision making is decision making. You might have different structures and whatnot to work through. I'm not saying there isn't, but fundamentally, what a great petri dish for you to develop your ability then years later in the second half of your life in family business facilitators and using some of that wisdom you've developed into coaching families in the here and now that are in the secular space, the business space. Although even that's wrong because a lot of businesses consider it to be a sacred space they're in as well. So
Yeah, I love
yeah.
what Eugene Peterson, he's written extensively about pastoral leadership. And in his book, Christ Plays in 10,000 Places, Eugene Peterson writes, I'm prepared to contend that the primary location for spiritual formation is the workplace. So
Mm-hmm.
whether we're paid or unpaid, the way we learn to live out our calling is by serving others in love according to our talents and gifts.
Absolutely right. Very well said. Very, very well said. We could, boy, there's a couple sermons I want to preach right now on that because that excites me to hear you say that because that's my philosophy as well. But let's get into why people have tuned in today here. Sowing Seeds and Reaping Legacy, one of your blogs. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want you to know that when I read the blog, I said, ay, ay, ay. There's a podcast. There's very little work to do. I could just say, Fred, take out the paper and read it word for word. It would be awesome. But we're going to put a little more life to it, a little more meat on the bones. Could you describe why did you write that? What are you attempting to do? And let's get into the three areas of seed sowing that are important. So I'm going to hand over the baton to you. Every once in a while, I'll get excited and interrupt you. But other than that, why don't you take us on the journey of sowing seeds, reaping legacy?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Chris. It's so great to have an appreciative reader of the blog. Sometimes when you're banging those out, you wonder who sees it. But I have
I'm a
gotten
groupie.
and I had a coach that told me in the early weeks of doing that. I've only been doing it for a few months now, but she said good content will find a home, and I trust that that's the case. And I want to write thoughtfully and well. I'm thinking mostly as I write these posts about the needs of business owning families who are navigating this transition from a successful legacy business to a multi-generational family enterprise. So what is the learning involved? What are the skills required to make that transition? Those are the posts that I want to write so that people can have a handle on what they might do. And the planting seeds post was about first steps. How do you get started on any of this? And I happen to be driving to the home of my 95-year-old mother. I live in central Indiana. She lives in central Illinois. So I drove through a lot of farmland on that drive. It happened to be in November. They were, the combines and corn pickers were in full swing, and it was going to be a great harvest. And I thought how much of a harvest came out of the seeds that were planted last spring. And this has been a part of our culture, in the Midwest. It's shaped our values tremendously, that sowing and reaping, the discipline, the patience required, and et cetera. And so I began to ask myself, what are the seeds that a business owning family or the leader of a business owning family could begin to plant now that would yield a harvest later on, some of which they'll live to see, some they may not live to see. But what are the seeds they can plant now that would bless those who would follow them? And I came up with 3 C's, but I wanted to reinforce the concept of the investment. And every successful business owner understands the value of capital expenditures. You're making long-term investments in strategic ways to build the capacity of your organization. I remember when I was a pastor, Chris, one of my parishioners, he and his wife had started a small business, a machine shop in central Indiana, and he was working on the line at Chrysler for many years, but they kept having work stoppages because they couldn't get enough of these parts they needed for the assembly. And he said to his buddy in the break room, why don't you and I pool our money and take a second mortgage on our houses and get a machine, start making these parts? And that's basically what they did. So he was running a machine shop. He'd been into it for 15 years at that point. And he took me on a walk through the shop floor, and he said, here is a machine that we paid $1 million to acquire. and it's going to make us, it'll build our capacity to machine additional kinds of parts and to do it with such exact specifications that it opens up new markets for our business. So he's made a huge investment. This guy was from very humble means, and the idea that he would even have $1 million, much less be able to spend $1 million on a machine for his business, he was proud of it, and rightfully so. So I use that same concept. How do we invest in not our business, because we understand the concept of investing in business, but what about the holistic health of our multi-generational family? What do those investments look like? And that's what the blog is about, 3 seeds.
Yeah, let me jump in here right now and say what's coming across in my mind just real quickly is when you're a farmer or if you're a business owner that's investing in $1 million worth of equipment, it takes a serious commitment, hard work, dedication. It also takes faith. And so, as you invest in your families, as you invest in your business, it's not always going to be a linear line up. There's sometimes going to be 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's going to take faith, but everything worthwhile in this life that's worth doing is going to take a measure of faith and belief and just keep going. I think that's super important to understand. It's not just a formula, it's also the faith that applies that formula.
Yeah. And there's a humility involved in that, Chris, because you're going to be learning and developing some skills that you may not have currently. And that's how I see my role. I'm not a subject matter expert in investments and estate planning the way you are. I admire people with those insights and those gifts. I'm not an attorney, not an accountant, but what I do know is facilitation. So I can bring a structure and a process to the work involved, and I can help with good communication required to lead to these outcomes that we articulate at the beginning we want to see.
Yes, and as we say with us navigating 3 areas of capital, one of them is your functional capital, and that's what we're talking about here in particular. So very valuable to be working with people that can help you design processes to get you where you want to go and have vision to encourage you to get you where you want to go. Maybe even more valuable than your portfolio is to have those kind of people on your team. So I'm sorry, I just get excited to hear you talk because it's like, yes, go get him, Fred. That's right. So,
well, having established the need to make these investments then and the learning attitude required to get involved, I can't think of anything more critical than just defining the values that are involved in how you live your life personally, and then helping the family develop its own values statement. So the first step in sowing seeds that will result in a legacy is to clarify your values. And we run a process. In fact, that's how we met, you and I, Chris, is that we're both involved with this community that's learning how to help business owning families do this work in values clarification and apply it through a values edge.
That's right. Absolutely right. So that's the first one is defining values, having mutual consent, make sure that we're basically rowing all the right direction. By the way, that might take a facilitator coming in to do that because right out the gates, you might not have common values or you might have, 20% that are quite divergent. We have to work through that, figure out what we can accept, where the latitude we can give with disagreement, but we have to basically be on the same page as a business and as a family if we have that kind of commonality that can help us make some decisions and move forward together, right?
It's great to have values alignment. You need at least, rudimentary alignment for values in order to work well together, to be productive. But we also acknowledge that differences in values are the sources of innovation and learning. So we're not dismissive of the value of different values. And one of the values of a process consultant is that you can come in as a neutral party,
right,
and everyone's involved at equal stakes there. And first we work on personal value statements. The Values Edge process uses 64 different values. So these are things like friendship, learning, excellence, patience, community, on and on. There's 64 of them. And you go through this list and you kind of prioritize those for yourself, asking, how did I really invest my time recently that I can say, yes, this was a value for me. And you get articulate about your core personal values. So who are you? What do you stand for? How do you make decisions in your life on priorities? These values are the core of that essence. And so you articulate them for yourself. And then it's not just all this individual values, but there are 8 drivers of values. So there are groups or families of values. And most of us tend to hang out in one or another of those different values drivers. And they're color coded in the case of Values Edge. That's why I like this process. So you can do that as individuals, and then you create your values pyramid and compare that with others in your family. And you can see at a glance who has your colors and who has other colors and where their priorities are. And as we said earlier, you need alignment to work well together, but you also want to value the differences that people bring to your leadership.
Yeah, you're a wise person if you do that. Right. And then figure out what hill we die upon, what hill is not so important. Right. And that's all part of values clarification as you develop a culture that can move forward. Right. Very important. So that's number one, right? Values clarification.
It is. And just before we leave that,
Yes.
Cynthia Scott, who trained us, she developed Values Edge over 30 years with her husband, Dennis Jaffe. And she has emphasized that it's not only the differences in values that can lead to conflict, misunderstanding, and business owning families, but sometimes people are identifying the same value as a priority, but they understand it differently. And so part of facilitation work that I've been doing is to help people share with one another what were the formative experiences that led to them understanding this content for that value. So this is what trust, for example, means to me. And these are experiences in my life where I learned about trust, what it means to trust and be trusted. And then we share with one another, gives a lot greater insight and context and nuance to affirming these values together.
Very good. All right. That's number one. We got that. That's simple. What is the second one? What's the second area of focus?
Defining your purpose, Chris. So after we do the individual values clarification, we do a separate session on family values, working out what the family stands for. And those lead to a purpose conversation quite naturally. So you've already articulated the core of your commitments in terms of values as a family. Those are foundational. They're going to shape your family culture. They already are, right? So we all have values in our families. They're implicit. What this process does is make them explicit. Then you take these values that you've articulated and you think together about how you live them out, including under pressure, right? It's the crisis that often reveals what our true values are. And you ask yourself, given our family history, so we'll often do a genogram. We help them look through their family histories. And then given your statement of your family values, what is it that we stand for? What is it that we're about? How do we make meaning out of life as a family? And what are family commitments? How are those related to our understanding of what we're called to do in the world? So clarifying a value statement leads to a purpose statement for the family. And it needn't be long, but it should be informed by your family history, and it should be informed by some appreciative inquiry, right? So questions about, when did you feel your family was at its best? And you give opportunity for people to share those experiences and to then think together about, given this list that you can generate with your group, about when we think the Smith family has been at their best in times past and more recently, what are the things that we might tease out as a purpose or a focus? What's the through line of excellences that we celebrate with joy? And that can lead to a purpose statement. They can be very simple. There's a family that owns theme parks, and their purpose statement is just to help. Their mission is to help families create experiences, memories worth repeating. And I took my 3-year-old grandsons to the North Pole here in Scottsdale, Arizona. We're out in Arizona visiting my grandkids here for the winter, and they were so excited to ride the Christmas train and to see all the lights and the displays, the anticipation, of course, of Christmas coming soon. It was really important for us to have that experience with them. And whoever set all that up and planned it, it was a bargain for us to pay admission and go through that with our grandkids. Definitely created an experience worth repeating. We hadn't even gotten back to the car when we were leaving the North Pole, and they were asking when they could go back. Well, there's a mission statement, right, for a family. There's a purpose statement. And there are others. The Gentine family that's in the 3rd generation now of leading Sargento cheese in Wisconsin, they've got three core principles that they articulate, and that's people, pride, and progress. So they're affirming the value of, they call their Sargento family, over 2,600 people, work at that firm, and the pride they take in the work that they do and the progress. So they're always looking to innovate, and they've grown from a niche player to a major player in the market because of their commitment to excellence and innovation.
That's wonderful. Yeah. And what I like too is you end up in going through these things, you end up developing a shared context. That's important because, everybody's understanding their stories, or why do they respond to this differently than perhaps somebody else does. I think that's so valuable to have a shared context, as well as much as you can, shared values, because now all of a sudden this becomes very, I should say, personal, practical, and real when context and values are intertwined. I think that's really great. That's two. Is there a third? What's the third?
Well, before we leave that, I want to say how important it is, Chris, to articulate this purpose statement, not only for the seniors who are going to be looking at what they're leaving behind. I mean, it's obviously going to be rooted in the family history, and it's going to be something that these founders hope will continue to shape the values and the goals of those who follow them. But in real time, it's extremely beneficial to the rising generation. And this is, it's hard to talk about this, okay, because this is a pain point for a lot of business owning families. But there's some concern for many business owning families who become successful in the market about how the rising generation, how their kids are going to experience life. And there's a concern that they avoid becoming entitled, too privileged. How do you help shape the rising generation and the values that you believe were formative in your own life and want to see continued in the extended family? Having this purpose statement gives kind of a North Star for, well, you can think of the star that led the wise men to Bethlehem, right? I mean, they had this thing that they could follow. The purpose statement for the family can do the same thing. Dennis Jaffe, in his book, Borrowed from Your Grandchildren, they researched 100-year-old family enterprises. One of the things they found was that there is some concern that the rising generation not become entitled or consumers, but that they be responsible and accountable. How do they become responsible and accountable? It's to a greater purpose, a purpose greater than themselves. That's what the family purpose statement can help them to aim for.
Yes.
In The Myth of the Silver Spoon, Kristen Keffler has written about young people growing up in privileged homes, wealthy homes as she has. She's critiquing the myth of the silver spoon. I mean, these young people children born into families of wealth and fame still have to prove themselves. And she writes about 3 forms of paralysis that can make it difficult for children growing up in affluent homes. They are the paralysis of the predecessor, the paralysis of privilege, the paralysis of possibility. And you can imagine how to fill those in. I don't need to say too much more about it because I think they're self-evident. But she applies positive psychology to addressing those paralyzing things. And she says, here's the value of a purpose statement, because having a focus beyond yourself helps you work through that paralysis. Yes, I do have a famous predecessor. They're very accomplished. That could intimidate me. It could paralyze me. But instead, I'm going to frame that as his or her contribution to the greater purpose of our extended family. And I too have a role in living out that purpose.
I love that. And I think that, one of the things that we've emphasized here at Navigating is that it's important to make sure that your legacy is one of generosity, of one of stewardship, to try to get Gen 2, 3, 4 to be growing in their understanding of responsibility, of blessing that we've received. We're here we've been given much, and much is required that those that have received much should be accomplishing. So, and that's great. And I think unless you develop that sort of thing, and a purpose statement is certainly that can be embedded in it, when you can give not understanding of entitlement, but understanding of opportunity and generosity and stewarding resources for the good of those around you, I think that gives a wonderful purpose that's not focused on self, it's focused outside. And I think that that's a really important thing to try to develop, to raise generous children and grandchildren as much as you can, to get them involved with those sorts of things. So for sure,
Yeah.
for sure. And again, that could be part of our purpose. Hey, this is what we do. However you codify that, and to talk about it, just talk about it, is really important. Well, we talked about planting the value seed and then the purpose seed. We have one more seed in the pouch, and share with everybody what that is.
It's giving back, Chris. I've seen personally how one family in the Family Foundation has made major impact in the culture on some pretty significant challenges we face, things that would be preventing the rising generation from flourishing. So helping business owning families think wisely and well about philanthropic strategy is one of the through lines of my own work personally. And it's one of the most fulfilling things that I get to be involved with.
For sure. And of course, you've had 17 years of experiencing doing primarily that. But yeah, again, you'll get no argument from us that one of the greatest keys to success is build a generous heart in your family. I think it solves so many problems. I've not heard the mental health aspect of that, but I like that consequence of being generous as well. That's really great. Share with us, for everybody, a little bit about the Red Sea illustration. I think that's really good.
Oh, yeah. It was a Sunday school lesson when I was just a little kid. I had a wonderful Sunday school teacher for a boys' middle school Sunday school class. So, he was a patient man. And Mr. Richardson lived a long life. He just passed away at 101 recently.
Wow.
And whenever you see a map of the Holy Land, you see the Sea of Galilee and then the Dead Sea. And he said the Sea of Galilee is actually a thriving ecosystem, and plant life and fish is abundant there. And of course, there are stories in the Bible around all of that kinds of fishing. And then it empties out into the Dead Sea, and there's no exit for the water in the Dead Sea. It flows into there and it stops. And so the only way the water leaves is through evaporation, and that leads to such a toxic level of salt that nothing can live there. And so his point was, if you learn to be a giving person, there's what God gives to us is given to us as a trust, and we pass it on. And by giving generously, we share what we've received from God, we pass it on to others, and that is how an ecosystem thrives. There's that exchange. When we just take and hoard and there's no exit, it just comes in, it doesn't go out, then the result is death.
Folks could rewind, play. I think that might be, for many of us, the most valuable 2 minutes of this whole podcast. I think that is key to success, to realize or to build within a generation. There's a very big part of this is not about me. It's not. And now, how do I make a difference with what I have? I think that is critical. I love that illustration. I hadn't heard that before. I didn't have cool Sunday school teachers like that. That was very, very good.
Well, there's a book out now, Chris, called Generation Impact, and it's arguing that the most influential philanthropists in history are on the scene right now. So the young people who are about to inherit what they're going to inherit globally, and certainly in the United States, positions them as the most significant, influential philanthropists in history. So taking this time now to shape the understanding in the rising generation, first of all, of the work required. When Carnegie wrote The Gospel of Wealth back in the 1880s, he said it takes no less ability than that which acquires the wealth to give it away to the community in a way that truly helps the community. And there are all kinds of cautionary tales in philanthropy about well-intentioned people who make gifts that don't end up helping, they actually hurt. And the Chalmers Institute has a wonderful book called When Helping Hurts. Bob Lupton has written on so-called toxic charity. So it's important to be thoughtful. In philanthropy, we say there's a double gift. There's not the obvious gift of the money, and that may be in a press release, but what often isn't in it is the thought behind how the money is given. And it's that second gift, the invisible gift of the thought behind how the money is given, that is really the more precious gift.
And the precious gift to the givers themselves. So again, as you were saying, Fred, get the other generation, second, third generation involved with decision making on how to give, and maybe some of them will actually be personally involved with the charity as they get excited about it and put boots on the ground as well. But yeah, that's again so wonderful. It makes my heart sing to hear that there is this next generation is perceived to be actually looking for ways to multiply the blessings they have into their communities, into their world. They're naturally wired that way, which is really neat, and kind of pushes back against the idea of a selfish, entitled generation. I mean, kids want to make a difference.
Yes, they do.
And that's really cool.
And they can use the wisdom of their elders as far as how that happens. And there's a generative exchange that takes place. You know, the insights, the energy of the rising generation and the wisdom of those who have gone before, that makes a robust combination, whether you're giving for relief or development.
And again, you're rowing toward the same destination, but you're doing it together. And now you're communicating and sharing experiences and, wisdom and vision and all sorts of things. And next thing you know, your family's getting closer. Amen. Amen. That's what this is about. So that's great. All right. So here we go. We got the commitment to planting value seeds, the commitment to planting purpose seeds, the commitment to planting philanthropic or generosity seeds. How can you tie all this together for us as we come in for a landing?
Yeah. Well, I just learned that when you plant a seed, Chris, the first growth of that seed in the soil is not up, as I had assumed it would be, but it's actually down. It puts forth this embryonic root called a radicle, R-A-D-I-C-L-E, radicle. And that radicle is this tiny embryonic root that goes down into the soil, and that little thing is what grows and eventually anchors everything that comes after it. So the plant that we see above it is anchored by the root that started as a radical. And that's how I think of these practices of sowing seeds. So clarifying your values, defining your purpose, beginning to give back. These are things that business owning families can start to do today that create the foundation that will keep you rooted and provide for all the growth that can follow.
That's right. And as the scriptures say, do not despise small beginnings. There is power in that little seed being radicalized. And some will take off a little faster than others. That's okay. Your job is to get planning, and your job is to exercise faith that this is something that ultimately will reap a great harvest. Fred, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom, and I appreciate you in my life. We appreciate you as being part of the Navigating Abundance family. And we're going to put up contact information for folks to get a hold of you. Any closing remarks you have for folks? Or
Chris, thank you for allowing me the chance to share with you a little bit about Family Business Facilitators. If we can be helpful in planning and leading meetings where your family addresses conflict, navigates succession, develops policy, governance structures, or focuses their giving, would be happy to help.
Yeah, fabulous. And I think you'll find the same warm, engaging, intelligent approach that you've just been hearing, folks, for the last 30, 40 minutes here. And that's what makes Fred so very cool. Thank you, my friend. I wish you the happiest of Christmases and wonderful New Year. And I appreciate you building into our audience's life. So folks, from Navigating Abundance and Family Facilitators, I would say this is Chris Tanke reminding you once again, your family is worth it.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Navigating Abundance. If you enjoyed this content and you'd like to see more of it in the future, please consider subscribing. If you'd like to join the conversation, leave a comment below on whatever platform that you're watching on. And if you'd like to learn more about Navigating Abundance, visit us at navigatingabundance.com.